when my sister looked me straight in the eye and said, "You don't belong here." I was standing on the front step of the house where I had spent 41 years of my life. The evening air smelled like rain and wet jasmine. My overnight bag was still in my hand. 2 cardboard boxes sat on the veranda, filled with my folded clothes, my mother's prayer beads, and the blue ceramic teapot my father used every Sunday. The locks had been changed, the curtains inside. My mother's cream lace curtains were drawn shut, as if the house itself had decided not to know me. I remember the exact time because the call to prayer from the mosque down the road had just ended, and when I checked my watch, it was 6:12 p.m. My name is Sadia Khan, and this is a story about what happens when the people you love mistake your kindness for weakness, and how sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one who changes everything. Let me take you back to where this all started. I was 63 when my life split into a before and an after. Before, I was the dependable one, the eldest daughter, the one people called when someone fell sick, when bills needed sorting, when tempers needed cooling, when food needed cooking for 20 with 3 hours' notice. My younger sister, Naila, used to joke that I had been born 40 years old. She would laugh and say, "Sadia came into the world already worrying about everyone else." At the time, I used to laugh too. Looking back, I should have heard the warning hidden inside that joke. Our family home sat on a corner lot in an old neighborhood where people still knew each other by the sound of their gate latches. It was not grand, but it was solid. My father had bought it in 1978 after years of saving, and he never stopped being proud of it. The front garden had 2 rose bushes, 1 stubborn lemon tree, and a narrow strip of mint that spread wherever it pleased. The floors inside were cool terrazzo. The hallway walls carried framed photos of graduations, weddings, babies, and people long gone. It was the kind of house that held memory in its bones. I was married once to a gentleman named Yusuf, who died 12 years before all this began. A heart attack, sudden, cruel. After he passed, I moved back into my parents' home for what I told myself would be just a little while, until I found my footing. But then my father's knees worsened. Then my mother's blood pressure became difficult. Then my father had a small stroke. And somehow a little while became years. I never said it out loud, but those years were not a burden to me. Hard, yes, lonely sometimes, but not a burden. Caring for my parents felt like paying back a debt that could never fully be repaid. They had raised us with dignity even when money was tight. My father worked in municipal records. My mother sewed clothes for neighbors to cover school fees and Eid dresses. We were never rich, but there was always food, always clean sheets, always decency. Naila, on the other hand, lived lightly. She was 5 years younger than me and had always been the shining one, pretty without effort, charming when she wanted something, fragile only when responsibility came near. She married a man named Rashid, who liked expensive watches and borrowed confidence from other people's money. Together they moved from one business idea to another, leaving behind unpaid favors and half-finished promises. Even so, I loved her. That is the part people do not understand when they hear stories like this. They imagine betrayal only happens in cold families. It doesn't. Sometimes betrayal blooms in homes where love was real. That is why it hurts the way it does. My mother used to say, "Sisters can fight with the tongue all day and still sleep under the same blanket at night." For many years, that was true of us. Naila would breeze into the house with bright scarves and loud perfume, kissing mother on both cheeks, carrying bakery sweets instead of homemade food, staying just long enough to be adored but not long enough to be needed. She had 2 sons, Arman and Samir, who treated our house like a second home when they were younger. I helped with homework, stitched costumes for school programs, sat through fevers and scraped knees. When Naila and Rashid were going through a difficult phase, which seemed to happen every 18 months, one or both boys would end up sleeping in our guest room for weeks. I never complained. What would have been the point? By the time my father passed away, the rhythms of the house had already changed around me. I knew which cupboard door stuck in the monsoon. I knew how many teaspoons of sugar Mother pretended she wasn't taking. I knew exactly where Father kept old land receipts, wrapped in a rubber band in the study drawer. I handled the utility bills, the medicine refills, the repairs, the gardener's wages, the zakat list in Ramadan, the condolence visits, the family calendars, the doctor appointments. After Father died, I took over everything quietly, and that was my first mistake. People respect what they can see. They do not always respect what is quietly carried. Naila cried beautifully at the funeral. She clung to my arm, pressed her face into my shoulder, and said, "Appa, I don't know what we'll do without him." I held her and said, "We'll take care of Mother together." She nodded against my shoulder and whispered, "Of course, together." But together, I learned, can be one of the most dishonest words in the language. In the months after Father's death, she came more often. At first, I was grateful. She brought fruit, sat with Mother, took phone calls from relatives, even offered to help sort paperwork. She started asking questions I thought were practical. Whose name is on the house now? Did Abba leave a will? Have you updated the property taxes? At your age, Sadia, what if something happens to you? These things should be clear. There was nothing unreasonable in the questions themselves. That is how these things begin. Not with thunder, with paperwork, with concern, with a tone so smooth you feel foolish for bristling. I told her the truth. The house mattered less to me than Mother's comfort. We would deal with legalities when the time came. For now, Mother was alive, and the house was still hers in every meaningful sense. Naila gave me a strange look then. "A quick one, sharp as a pin, gone the next second, if you say so," she said. Looking back, I should have noticed more. The way she lingered near Father's study drawers, the way Rashid asked too casually what houses on our street were selling for, the way Naila once stood in the kitchen doorway, looking around, and said, "This place would feel so different with modern windows and a proper open-plan renovation." I laughed and said, "Your brother-in-law is dead, my father is gone, and my mother likes her walls where they are. We are not knocking anything down." She smiled, but her eyes did not. Then Mother got worse, not suddenly, softly. The way dusk comes into a room without asking permission. Her legs weakened. Her memory stayed mostly clear, thank God, but she tired easily. She would sit by the back window with her knitting untouched in her lap and ask me the same question twice. She started needing help at night. Her appetite changed. Her voice, once brisk and commanding, became thin with effort. I moved into the room next to hers. For 2 years, my life narrowed to her care. I do not say that bitterly. I say it plainly. Some women of my generation will understand without a single extra word. There are seasons in a woman's life when her world becomes medicine schedules, soft rice, towel, warmed baths, careful lifting, and listening for breath in the dark. Naila visited more during those years too. To outsiders, she looked devoted. She posted old photographs on family group chats. She sent voice notes saying, "No one loves our mother like I do." She arrived carrying flowers and left before laundry time. Still, I accepted what help came, because when you are tired enough, even shallow help looks deep. 3 weeks before my mother died, I heard Naila in the hallway speaking in a low voice to Rashid. I was coming from the kitchen with soup. The hallway light was dim. I had not meant to listen, but my name stopped me. Rashid whispered, "If she signs now, later there can be no confusion." Naila said, "She's not signing anything while Sadia is hovering. I told you, we need the right moment." I stood there so still the soup nearly spilled over the edge of the bowl. Then Mother called out from her room, "Sadia," and by the time I turned back into the hallway, Naila was already smiling. "There you are," she said brightly. "I was just telling Rashid that you need more help." I said nothing. I carried the soup in and closed the door behind me. That night I barely slept. In the morning I told myself not to be suspicious. Grief makes fools of us before the grieving has even begun. Stress turns every half-heard sentence into a threat. I told myself Naylor could not possibly mean what it sounded like. I told myself many things. Then my mother died on a Thursday at 3:47 p.m. with my hand in hers. The room was quiet except for the ceiling fan. A sunbeam had fallen across her blanket. Her breathing had been shallow all day. I had just moistened her lips with water when she looked at me, really looked at me with full awareness, and said one last clear sentence. Don't let anybody push you out of your own peace. Those were the last words my mother ever spoke to me. At the time, I thought she was talking about grief. I did not understand she was warning me. The house filled immediately, as such houses do when death arrives. Women in soft shawls, men in low voices, plates of dates, Quran recitation, condolences, footsteps, steam from kettles, extra chairs brought out, children hushed in corners, the heavy, unreal politeness of fresh morning. I moved through it all in a fog. Naylor was everywhere, taking calls, receiving relatives at the gate, telling everyone, Sadia hasn't slept, poor thing. I'm handling things. She put one hand on my back again and again, guiding me, directing me. At one point she took a ring of keys from the kitchen hook and slipped it into her handbag. I noticed, but I was too numb to ask why. 3 days after the funeral, when most of the visitors had thinned, she came into my room just after Fajr. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring at the wall. She closed the door and said, "We need to discuss practical matters." I looked up. "Now, yes now," she said. "These things shouldn't drag. It creates problems later." I remember the way the light fell behind her, turning her face partly shadowed. I remember the smell of strong perfume, too sharp for that early hour. "What practical matters?" I asked. "The house, the accounts, mother's jewelry, documents." She folded her arms. "We need to be organized." I said, "We can sit in a week or two." She gave a small laugh. "A week or two, Sadia, this isn't just your decision." Something cold slid through me then. I said slowly, "What does that mean?" She sat in the chair opposite me, crossed one leg over the other, and for the first time in my life, I saw no softness in her face at all. "It means," she said, "that this house should be handled sensibly. Rashid and I have spoken about moving here. It makes more sense. We have a family. Space will be used properly. You can stay, of course, if arrangements are made." For a moment I thought I had misheard her. "You want to move in here," I said. "We are family," she replied. "Why are you making it sound strange?" "Because it is strange," I said. "Mother has just been buried." Her jaw tightened. "Exactly, which is why things must be settled." I stood up. My knees felt weak, but my voice stayed even. "This is not the time, and no one is deciding anything without me." Her eyes narrowed. That was the moment the air changed between us. I wish I could tell you I confronted her boldly and ended it there. But that is not how shock works. Shock moves slowly. It asks polite questions long after danger has entered the room. I said, "Naylor, if this is about temporary help, say that. But if you are talking about taking over this house," she cut me off. "Taking over? Listen to yourself. You act like a martyr because you stayed here. No one asked you to." I stared at her. "No one asked you to." Those 6 words landed harder than any slap could have. I said mother needed care, and you chose to do it. She snapped. "Don't present it now like some saintly sacrifice we all owe you for." I felt my hands go cold. For years, I had buried exhaustion so deeply, even I could not name it. And now there it was, standing in front of me in my sister's mouth, turned into accusation. I said, very quietly, "Please leave my room." She stood, lifted her handbag and said, "We'll speak again when you're ready to be realistic." She left. I sat on the bed for almost 20 minutes without moving. By noon, 2 things had happened. First, I went to Father's study to gather the property file and found the main folder missing. Second, when I asked Naylor if she had moved it, she looked directly at me and said, "Maybe you misplaced it." You're not exactly thinking clearly these days. That was the first lie I caught in full daylight, and it would not be the last. Over the next 72 hours, the house stopped feeling like shelter and started feeling like contested ground. Rashid came by with measuring tape and a contractor's card in his shirt pocket. Naila took phone calls in the garden, lowering her voice whenever I came near. Armin arrived and carried several of Mother's smaller jewelry boxes to the car, saying, "Kola told me to keep things safe." When I objected, Naila said, "Don't make scenes in front of the children." Children, Armin was 31 years old. On the fourth evening, I went to the pharmacy to collect Mother's final paperwork and return unopened medication. I was gone for 58 minutes. I know because I still had the receipt in my handbag later. When I came back, the front gate was latched from inside. The porch light was on. My overnight bag and 2 boxes sat outside, and when Naila opened the door halfway and stepped into the gap, she said the words that still echo in me sometimes at night. "You don't belong here." I could barely speak. "What are you doing?" She folded her arms and leaned against the frame of my mother's house. "Our mother is gone," she said. "This house is being handled now. You need to stop acting like you own it." I whispered, "My room is inside." She said, "Not anymore." My mouth went dry. "You changed the locks. For everyone's peace, for everyone's peace." I repeated. Her voice turned colder. "Take your things and go to Miriam for a few days, or a hotel. I need space to sort matters properly." I said, "You cannot lock me out of my own home." And then she gave a little shrug and said, "Sadia, you don't belong here." Behind her, I could see Rashid crossing the hallway with my father's old document box in his hands. That was when I understood. This was not grief, not confusion, not a misunderstanding. This was a plan. And my sister had been preparing it while our mother was still alive. But what I didn't know yet was how far that plan went, or how much she was willing to destroy to make it work. There is a moment after betrayal when your body knows the truth before your mind accepts it. You shake, but you are not cold. You feel sick, but you are not ill. You keep expecting the scene to correct itself, for someone to say, "This has gone too far," or "There has been a mistake," or "Of course you can come inside." But no one said that, not Naila, not Rashid, not Armin, who appeared briefly behind the curtain and then disappeared the second he saw me standing there. Not the neighbors peeking from half-open windows. Not the boy from across the street who slowed his bicycle and then hurried on when he sensed trouble. I stood on that veranda with my boxes and my dead mother's medicine receipt still crumpled in my handbag, and I realized a terrible thing. Humiliation is loud inside the person living it and strangely quiet to everyone else. I said, "I am not leaving like this." Naila tilted her head. "You already have." Then she shut the door. I heard the new lock turn. For a few seconds I could not breathe properly. The air felt thick, like I was swallowing cloth. I put my hand on the door, as though wood itself might feel ashamed and open for me. It did not. The first person who came to me was Mrs. Fernandez, our next-door neighbor of 27 years. A widow with silver hair and the sharp eyes of a woman who misses nothing. She opened her side gate and hurried over in house slippers. "Sadia," she said softly, "come inside my place." I looked at her and nearly broke then. Not because she had solved anything, but because kindness at the wrong moment can undo you faster than cruelty. I shook my head. "No, I can't." She took my arm firmly. "You can come." I let her lead me. Inside her house, she sat me at the dining table, brought sweet tea I did not want, and waited until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the cup. After a long silence, she said, "I saw them changing the lock at 4 o'clock. I looked up sharply. "You saw?" She nodded. "I asked your sister what was happening. She said you had decided to stay with your daughter and wanted the house secured." I let out a hollow sound that was almost a laugh. "My daughter lives 6 hours away," I said. Mrs. Fernandez's mouth tightened, "I know." That was the first witness. There would be more. That night I stayed in her guest room, under a crocheted blanket that smelled faintly of lavender soap. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling fan and replayed every conversation of the last 3 years, every odd look, every missing paper, every moment I had chosen peace over confrontation because I thought family deserved patience. Around 2:47 a.m., I sat up and remembered the hallway whisper. If she signs now, later there can be no confusion. I whispered it aloud into the darkness. That sentence changed shape in my mind. It was no longer suspicious. It was evidence. By morning, shame had cooled into something steadier. Not strength exactly, not yet, but direction at 8:15 a.m. I called Naila. She answered on the third ring, sounding almost cheerful. Yes, I said, open the house, now. A pause, then, don't take that tone with me. I spoke slowly, so she would hear every word. You locked me out without legal authority. My belongings are inside. My mother's and father's documents are inside. You will open the gate. She laughed softly. Legal authority? Since when did you become a lawyer? Since when did you become an owner? There was a sharper pause then. Finally she said, come at noon. Rashid will be here. No apology, no shame, a summons. At 11:58 a.m., I walked back to my own house with Mrs. Fernandez beside me. She had insisted. A witness hurts no one honest. She said, the gate was open. Naila stood in the hall, wearing a pressed beige kurta, as if we were hosting a polite family discussion. Rashid sat in father's armchair. That detail enraged me more than anything he said for the first 15 minutes. My father's chair, his feet planted on my father's rug, one ankle resting on the other as though he belonged to the room. Naila gestured to the sofa. Sit, let's not be dramatic. I remained standing. So, I said, where are the house documents? Rashid smiled the way men smile when they think calm belongs to them by right. Before documents, perhaps we should discuss the future. No, I said. First the documents. Naila exhaled loudly. This is exactly why matters become difficult with you. You cling emotionally to things instead of looking forward. I looked at her. My mother died 8 days ago, and the world did not stop. She snapped. Mrs. Fernandez, bless her, spoke then for the first time. No one said it did, but this is not proper. Naila turned, surprised, as if only then remembering other people could hear her. With respect, she said stiffly, this is a family matter. Mrs. Fernandez folded her arms, then behave like family. I could have kissed her. Rashid cleared his throat. The house needs organized management. Naila, as daughter, has equal standing. Equal standing, I said, does not mean changing locks and removing papers. He leaned forward. Let us be blunt. You are one woman, alone. This house is too much for you. We are prepared to take responsibility. Prepared to take responsibility. Such elegant language for theft. I said, prepared by whom? Naila reached into her bag and laid a photocopied document on the coffee table. My eyes went to mother's name, then to a line that looked like a signature, then to wording that made my scalp prickle. It appeared to be a transfer authorization giving Naila primary residential authority, pending estate settlement. I stared at it, then looked up. This is not mother's signature. Naila said it is. It is not. Rashid spread his hands. You are upset, understandably, but denying reality won't help. I bent closer. My mother's signature always dipped sharply at the last letter of her first name. This one dragged flat. Also, the date on the page was from a Tuesday afternoon when mother had been at the cardiologist's office with me from 1:00 to 5:30 p.m. I knew because I had the prescription slip in my files. My voice changed then. It became very calm. Where did you get this? Naila lifted her chin. Mother knew who had a family to think about. Something inside me went silent. There are moments when anger does not flare. It settles. It becomes a clean blade. I said, you forged this. She stood up so fast her bangles clinked. How dare you? How dare I? I repeated. You put a false signature on a paper and locked me out of my own home. Rashid rose too. Mind your accusations. I looked from one to the other and understood that reasoning was finished. Still, I tried once more, not because they deserved it, because I needed to know I had tried. I said, Naylor, whatever this is, stop now. Give me the original documents. We can sit with a lawyer together. We can sort things properly. Her face hardened completely. There is nothing to sort. She said, you have lived here long enough. This house belongs to the family, not to your feelings. I almost laughed at the cruelty of that sentence. As if I were not family, as if I were a tenant of memory. Mrs. Fernandez touched my sleeve, a small signal. Leave, so I did, not because I had lost, because I had finally understood the game. Outside on the sidewalk, I took one long breath and said, I need a lawyer, Mrs. Fernandez nodded. Yes, you do. By that afternoon, the story had already begun spreading through the relatives. I learned this because my cousin Shabana called at 4:20 p.m. and said, with that oily softness some women reserve for scandals, Sadia, I heard you are having a breakdown after Auntie's passing. I'm so sorry, I said. I'm not having a breakdown. Oh, she said quickly, of course. That's just what Naylor implied. She said you were confused and making accusations. There it was. The second betrayal. Not only were they trying to take the house, they were preparing the ground by making me appear unstable. I sat very still while Shabana talked, and I realized something with deep clarity. A lie travels faster when it sounds like concern. By evening, 2 more calls came, one relative asking whether I was really safe to be alone. Another gently suggesting that grief counseling might help me accept transitions. I almost admired the craft of it. They had not called me greedy, that would have invited debate. They called me unwell. Once a woman over 60 is painted as confused, emotional, resistant to change, people stop asking what was done to her and start asking how to manage her. I wish I could say I was above being wounded by that. I was not, at 7:05 p.m., sitting on Mrs. Fernandez's spare bed with my handbag in my lap. I cried for the first time since my mother's burial. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just the exhausted, private crying of a woman who has been decent for too long among indecent people. I cried for my mother. I cried for my father's study drawer. I cried because I had ironed Naylor's school uniforms when she was 13. I cried because I had once sold a gold bangle Yusuf gave me so Naylor could cover a loan payment without her in-laws finding out. I cried because love leaves fingerprints on the very hands that later push you away. But tears are not the end of a woman like me. Sometimes they are the washing clean of her sight. The next morning I went to the bank, not our personal savings bank, my parents' old branch, the one where father had kept records with almost ceremonial neatness. I knew the manager there only slightly, but the assistant manager, Mr. Imran Sadiq, had been a former student of mine from my short years teaching commerce before marriage. He recognized me immediately. Mrs. Khan, he said, standing up. Please sit. I'm very sorry to hear about your mother. His kindness nearly undid me again, but by then I had learned to steady myself before speaking. I need information, I said, if I am allowed to have it. He listened without interrupting while I explained that my mother had died, papers were missing, and a document had surfaced that I believed was false. He asked careful questions. Was I joint signatory on any account? Yes, on the household operating account father had added me to after his stroke. Did I have identification? Yes, death certificates. I could provide them. Was there any power of attorney in effect? That question hit me like a bell. Power of attorney. I repeated. He gave a small, professional shrug. If there was one filed at the bank, it would affect account authority. My mouth went dry. I need to know, I said. He checked what he was permitted to check. Then he looked up, and I knew before he spoke that something was wrong. There is a limited financial authority document on record, he said carefully, filed 11 months ago, naming your sister Naylor Rashid. For a moment the room went dim at the edges. Impossible, I said. I can't release copies without formal request. He said, but yes, it exists. I heard myself ask, was it used? A pause. Then, there have been several withdrawals in the last 10 months beyond usual household patterns. I sat frozen. My mother used to ask me sometimes, why does this balance seem lower? And I had assumed medicines, nursing supplies, inflation, repairs, funeral advance costs for relatives we helped, the 1,000 small leakages of ordinary life. Now my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. How much? I whispered. He hesitated. Then, very quietly, he said, enough that you should speak to an estate lawyer immediately. That was the moment hurt turned to anger. Real anger, not noise, not rage for show. The kind of anger that stands up, smooths its clothes, and goes to work. I walked out of the bank into noon sunlight that felt far too bright for the day I was having. Cars moved past. A fruit seller shouted prices. Somewhere nearby a child laughed. It offended me that the world could continue so normally while mine was being looted in broad daylight. I stood under a jacaranda tree and asked myself the question that would haunt me for weeks. How could I have been so blind? And then, because truth demands precision, I answered myself. I was not blind. I was trusting. There is a difference. And that difference matters especially to women like us, who are trained from girlhood to keep peace, absorb insult, and assume love will correct character eventually. It does not. By 2:30 p.m., I had called a lawyer recommended by Mrs. Fernandez's son. Her name was Farah Ollie, and she agreed to see me the next morning. That night Naylor sent me a message. Please stop involving outsiders. We can settle this privately if you behave reasonably. I stared at the screen. Then another message came. Also, don't embarrass the family by making false claims about money. False claims about money? I typed back only one sentence. Bring every document you have tomorrow if you want private peace. She never replied, but that was not the end of it, because at 9:15 p.m. Armin called. His voice sounded strained. Caller, yes. A long pause. Then I think you should just let this go. I closed my eyes, let what go, the house issue, he said. My parents say you are being stubborn. They said Daddy wanted things shared fairly. Did your daddy tell you that herself? I asked. Another pause. No, but, Armin. I said, my voice gentler than he deserved, when you were 9 and broke your arm falling off the school wall, who sat in the emergency room with you until morning. He said nothing. When your mother disappeared to Islamabad for 3 days without telling anyone because she was overwhelmed, who made your lunch and ironed your uniform, still nothing. Then he said quietly, Kala, please don't do this. I am not doing anything. I said, I am asking what is mine to be left where it belongs. He whispered, Abu says if lawyers get involved, everything will get ugly. I looked out at the dark guest room window and said, it is already ugly. Then I ended the call. Afterward, I sat in silence for a long time. Betrayal spreads like ink. It does not stay between two people. It stains everyone who decides convenience matters more than truth. And still, even then, I did not know the worst of it. The next morning, at 10:00 sharp, I sat in Farah Ollie's office, surrounded by framed certificates, and the clean, unsentimental smell of paper and printer ink. She was younger than I expected, perhaps 42, but she had the stillness I trust in professionals who don't waste words. She listened to everything, every timeline, every sentence, every missing file, every withdrawal, every changed lock, every lie. When I finished, she asked, do you have any proof of continuous residence in the home? I almost laughed. Only 20 years of utility payments, medical deliveries, tax receipts, nursing invoices, voter registration, and every repair bill since 2014. For once, she said dryly, being responsible works in your favor. It was the first time I had smiled in days. Then she leaned back and said, Mrs. Con, 2 things can be true at once. 1. Inheritance law may require proper estate distribution depending on title structure. 2. What your sister did looking. You out, removing documents, possibly forging signatures, possibly misusing power of attorney, can be unlawful regardless. I felt something steady in me then. Not hope yet, but footing. Farah continued, first, we verify title at the land registry. Second, we request bank records formally. Third, we demand immediate restoration of your access or obtain an emergency order. Fourth, we preserve evidence. I asked, and if she forged my mother's signature? Farah's face changed very slightly. Harder, colder. Then she said, your sister has made a very foolish mistake. What I didn't know at that moment was that Naila had not made one foolish mistake. She had made several, and within the next few days, I would find out just how deep her greed had gone. There is a particular humiliation in having to prove the reality of your own life. In the days that followed, I gathered pieces of myself from envelopes, drawers, email printouts, utility accounts, prescription folders, tax statements, old calendars, and grocery logs. Every ordinary habit I had kept for 20 years suddenly became evidence that I existed where I said I existed, that I had paid what I said I paid, that I had cared for who I said I cared for. Farah called it documentation. To me, it felt like stitching my dignity back together by hand. The land registry search came first. I was sitting at Mrs. Fernandez's kitchen table eating dry toast I could barely swallow when Farah phoned at 11:40 a.m. Sadia, she said, the house title is not what your sister thinks it is. I sat up straight. What do you mean? Your father amended the title structure 9 years ago after his stroke? For a second I could not speak. He had told me once he was updating practical matters, but I had not pressed him. He disliked discussing his own mortality and preferred doing things quietly. Farah continued, the property passed into a protected family trust arrangement with your mother as residential beneficiary for life, and upon her death, primary occupancy rights were assigned to you. I pressed my hand to my mouth. To me, yes, she said. There are secondary contingency clauses for eventual sale or shared value distribution after your lifetime or voluntary surrender, but no one could lawfully remove you, not without your consent or court process. I closed my eyes and saw my father at his desk, adjusting his glasses, organizing papers with solemn little taps. He had known, he had seen something I had not. Farah added, your sister either never checked properly or assumed you would be too intimidated to do so. I said very quietly, she told me I didn't belong there. Farah's voice sharpened. Legally and morally, she was wrong. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I cried again, but this time not from helplessness, from the strange, painful relief of discovering that someone who loved me had tried to protect me, even from beyond his life. Mrs. Fernandez sat across from me peeling green beans into a steel bowl. She looked up and said, good news. I nodded. My father made sure I couldn't be thrown out. She smiled without surprise. A good man sees farther than others. Yes, he had. But the good news carried a bitter edge. If the title structure was that clear, then Naila's behavior was not confusion. It was strategy. She had either ignored the truth or tried to bury it under faster lies. By then Farah had already sent a formal legal notice demanding immediate access restoration, preservation of all documents, and a halt to any estate interference pending review. Naila responded within hours through a cheap, blustering email, written in the kind of language people use when they want to sound powerful without actually saying anything testable. She accused me of emotional instability, claimed I had voluntarily vacated the premises, claimed items removed from the house had been secured for safeguarding, claimed mother had expressed repeated concerns about my capacity to manage affairs. Farah read the message and said, good, let her keep writing. Good, I asked. People who lie too quickly often over-explain. Over-explanation creates contradictions. Contradictions. That word became precious to me, because once I began looking closely, contradictions were everywhere. The photocopied authorization, Naylor had shown me used one typeface in the heading and another in the body. The witness line carried a partial signature from someone listed only as S. Malik. We found no notary stamp, no registry filing, no supporting affidavit. More troubling, the date on the page fell during a week when Mother had been receiving home nurse visits 3 times daily and had barely been strong enough to sit upright for long. Farah asked, "Do you still have records of the nurse schedule?" I did. Of course I did. Because responsible women keep evidence without meaning to. I found the notebook that evening. Cream cover, blue spiral binding, every blood pressure reading, medication dose, fever note, bathroom assistance, and visiting nurse sign-in over 18 months. There, in my own handwriting, was the date from Naylor's document. Under it, 2:10 p.m., left for cardiology. 5:35 p.m., returned home, Mother exhausted, no visitors allowed, no visitors allowed, no signature session. No transfer, nothing. The next contradiction came from within the family. My cousin Shabana, having sniffed fresher gossip, called again and said, "Naylor says Mother personally asked her to take charge because she feared you would isolate yourself and never move on." I said, "Interesting. Why interesting?" "Because your beloved Naylor also told other people I had already chosen to move out." Silence. Then that told me she had heard different versions too. I did not argue further. I had started learning that you do not need to win every conversation. You only need to let liars hear their own footsteps. 3 days later, Farah arranged for a locksmith and court officer to accompany us to the house if Naylor refused access voluntarily. The officer's presence was enough. Rashid opened the door himself at 9:35 a.m., face dark with anger. Naylor stood behind him in the hall, arms folded so tightly I wondered if she could feel her own nails in her skin. "This is absurd," she said, calling officials into the family home. Farah answered before I could. "Your sister lives here lawfully. She was excluded without authority. We are restoring access and documenting the condition of the premises. I stepped inside. People speak of thresholds lightly, but a threshold can be a battlefield. The moment my shoe crossed that doorway, I felt my heart slam once, hard. Home smelled different, not wrong, just disturbed, like a cupboard opened by someone who does not know where things belong. The photo wall had been rearranged. My mother's shawl basket was gone from the hall table. The study drawer stood slightly open. And my room had been half emptied, as if I were already becoming a story someone else was telling. I put my hand on the bedpost and steadied myself. Farah said quietly, "Take your time." Naylor followed us in and said, "We packed what we thought you'd need. There was no malice." I turned and looked at her. "No malice," I repeated. "You put my life in boxes on the porch." Her face flushed. "Because you force everything into drama." The court officer, who had seen more family ugliness than any of us, said without expression, "Ma'am, please limit your remarks." For once, Naylor fell silent. While Farah and the officer documented the locks, room condition, and missing files, I walked through the house in slow disbelief. Mother's medicine cabinet was partly empty. Father's deed folder was still missing. One of the old tin boxes from the upper cupboard, where Mother kept gold bangles wrapped in muslin, was gone. So was the teak stationery box containing past tax slips. But what stopped me cold was the study desk. The top drawer, the one Father always kept orderly, now held loose papers, a half-open envelope from a developer, and Rashid's business card tucked under a file clip. A developer, my mouth went dry. I pulled out the envelope. Inside was a letter of interest regarding redevelopment opportunity. For our address, with a tentative consultation date from 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks earlier, while Mother was still alive. Farah, seeing my face, came over and took the letter carefully. "This," she said, "we copy immediately." Naylor moved toward us. "That is private." Farah looked at her as if she were a child insisting rain was optional. "No," she said. "It is discoverable." It was the first time I saw fear flash across my sister's face. only a second. But it was there, and that tiny flicker told me what my heart had already begun to understand. This wasn't only about living in the house. They had planned to profit from it. By afternoon, another piece fell into place. While sorting papers in my room, I found a folded receipt jammed inside one of Mother's old prayer books. It was from a copying and document service shop, date the same week as the bank power of attorney filing. 2 certified copies, legal, size, signature witness service. I stared at it, then I remembered something else. Mother had complained once that Naila kept insisting she sign routine papers. I had asked what papers, and Mother had waved it away and said, "Your sister talks too much when I'm tired." At the time I thought no more of it. Now the memory came back bright and poisonous. Farah sent the receipt to her clerk for tracing. Meanwhile, I returned to the bank with the formal request paperwork. This time, Mr. Imran was more direct. There were recurring cash withdrawals, he said. Also 2 transfers labeled household support, though much larger than your usual monthly spending. Where did they go? I asked. He could not yet disclose all details before the estate authority process moved further. But he said enough. 1 transfer appears linked to your sister's joint business account with her husband. I stared at him. Not medicines, not household upkeep, their account. I came out of the bank and stood in the parking lot, unable to move for a full minute. So that was it? This was not 1 lie, 1 forged page, 1 ugly lock. This was layered, calculated. Months, perhaps years, of careful siphoning while I was changing sheets, ordering medication, lifting our mother at night, and trusting the family around me to behave like human beings. I felt heat flood my chest then. So sudden I had to sit on a low wall under the bank sign. How could someone do this to their own mother? To their own sister? No, that is not the right question. The better question, the one older women must ask more often, is this: why do we spend so much time asking how they could do it, instead of asking what we will do now that they have? That was the day determination replaced grief. I stopped saying if, I started saying when the records come in, when the signatures are tested, when the lies collide, when the truth stands up in a room too crowded with excuses. That evening, another witness arrived without warning. Our former home nurse, Sister Main, phoned after hearing from a mutual acquaintance that some family matter had arisen after Mother's death. She said, "Madame Sadia, I don't want to interfere, but I need to tell you something." I stepped into the garden to take the call privately. "Tell me." There were 2 afternoons when your sister asked me to step outside Mother's room because she wanted to discuss personal matters. My pulse jumped. When? She gave dates. One of them matched the week of the power of attorney filing, and Sister Main lowered her voice. The second time, your mother seemed upset afterward. She told me my younger one is always in a hurry. I asked if everything was all right. She said, as long as Sadia sees things, I'm fine. I closed my eyes. That sentence hurt almost as much as the last one Mother spoke to me, because she had known enough to be uneasy. Not enough to stop it, perhaps. Too tired, too trusting, pressured at the wrong hour by the wrong daughter. But uneasy. Sister Main continued, another thing. On one occasion, your sister asked me whether medication for sleep made patients easier to manage. I thought it was odd. A chill moved down my spine, not criminal on its own, not proof of anything beyond ugliness, but taken with everything else, it painted a picture that made me physically ill. I thanked her and asked if she would provide a written statement if needed. After a pause, she said, "For your mother's dignity, yes." There it was again. Witness number 3. And still Naila kept pushing. That night, while I was sorting laundry back in my own room under temporary restored access, she appeared at the doorway and said, "Are you enjoying this?" I turned slowly. "Enjoying what?" "The spectacle," she said, "dragging lawyers and strangers through the house." I folded a blouse and laid it flat before answering. "You changed the locks?" She laughed harshly. "You have always loved playing victim." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, That only works if there isn't a victim. Her mouth tightened. Father should never have let you bury yourself here. You think making tea and paying bills makes you queen of the house. No, I said. It made me the daughter who stayed. That landed, I saw it, because no matter how she twisted it, she could never rewrite the simple fact that when things were hard, I was there and she was not. She stepped closer. Don't say that like I abandoned anyone. Didn't you? The silence between us was thick enough to taste. Finally she said, lower now, you've always judged me. I nearly smiled then, not from amusement but from recognition. There it was, the oldest. Refuge of the guilty. Turn the accusation into injury. Become wounded to avoid being accountable. I said, no, Naylor. I excused you, for years. That is different. Her face changed. She left without another word, and as I listened to her footsteps fade down the hall, I noticed something small that changed everything again. On the side table, near the corridor, sat a leather document pouch I had never seen before. It was unzipped. Inside was a copy of the developer letter, and beneath it, a handwritten note in Rashid's slanted script. Need Sadie out first. Clean title after estate confusion. Fast sale best. I stared at those words until they blurred. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was conspiracy, and from that moment on I stopped hoping they would come to their senses. I started preparing to make sure the truth met them before the money did. Once a woman stops hoping to be treated fairly by unfair people, her mind becomes very efficient. Mine certainly did. I had spent weeks reacting, crying, remembering, flinching, defending, explaining. But after finding that note, something in me settled into order. I bought a fresh notebook. Page 1 read, timeline. Page 2, witnesses. Page 3, documents missing. Page 4, questions they cannot answer honestly. It may sound simple, but older women know this. Clarity is a weapon, not a cruel one, a clean one. Farah was pleased when I arrived at her office with labelled folders. I may hire you, she said, for what? For making my job easier. That day we built the strategy properly. First, preserve occupancy rights and prevent any sale. Second, obtain full account records and the filed financial authority instrument. Third, challenge any forged or manipulated documents. Fourth, gather statements from witnesses before family pressure could silence them. Fifth, do nothing emotional in writing. That last instruction was important. Do not send long texts. Farah said, do not justify, do not argue. Every message should be short, factual, and boring. Boring. Yes, she said. Truth is often boring. That is one reason liars dislike it. I smiled. Then she slid a paper toward me. I also want you to think ahead. If your sister offered an apology tomorrow and asked to sort things privately, what would you actually want? The question surprised me. I sat back and thought. Finally I said, I want my parents' dignity protected. I want every stolen rupee accounted for. I want no one ever again to tell me I have no place in my own home. And I stopped, and